I don't think I've had my kitten Storm on screen yet, right? I've had Storm for like 6 months, and I think she's always been too shy to come on camera and everything, but today she kind of walked up to me. So say hi, Stormy. She's kind of trying to get down already. Look at her. Little rascal. Say hi, baby. Hi. Imagine she just smacked me, like just like Chris rocked me right now. That would be horrible. Say hi. Say hi to the subscribers and everybody. This is who you're feeding by supporting me, by the way. Now what are you going to do? Now you're not going to get the gamer subs? Huh? Now you're not going to subscribe? Now you're not going to hit like? Hi, baby. Oh, come on. I'm going to let you know. Let her go be free. But hi, everybody. It's Pineapple. Today is a big day. We're going to talk about something that I know a lot of people have been wanting me to talk about. A lot of people have been wanting me to break this down. We do it every year. We do it for every season of My Hero Academia so far. So today we're going to talk about what I think is going to be the chapter to episode breakdown on this season of My Hero Academia. Basically, how many chapters do I think this season of My Hero Academia is going to cover? And we're going to start this off by saying I don't expect this to be 100% accurate, right, or anything like that. I made one for last season, and it obviously wasn't accurate because Bones made some interesting decisions with Season 5 of My Hero Academia. So understand that, you know, this is not like a rubric or anything, like a 100% prediction or anything. This is just kind of like my version, or at least if I was running Bones, how I would break the season down to a certain extent, right, to try to fit all the content that we have to fit into the season at the very least, right? So this is my attempt at trying to figure out how they're going to do next season and how many chapters are going to go into the episodes. But again, don't expect it to be 100% accurate, or, you know, even that accurate, depending on how Bones handles this season. So let's get right off with episode 1 being a filler episode. So we kind of just let that go. That goes to the side. We ignore that. We know that there's a filler episode at the beginning of every season of My Hero Academia. I used to be mad about it. I'm not mad about it anymore now that I know it's not really like a Bones decision. It's more of like the channel they're on needs them to do that every season. So we lose one episode to filler every season. All I can hope for, and as you'll see on this list actually, is that they don't lose another episode to filler, right? Like you could only do so many froppy fillers before it starts getting aggravating, and I think the limit was 1, and they've already done 2. I believe now. So please, no more random froppy episode or anything like that. We have a lot of content to get to. We don't have time for another filler episode, honestly. So with episode 2, I think we're going to start the episode off on chapter 259, right? So we're going to see the hospital raid begin. Mirko's going to find the lab and everything. And then I think it's going to pretty much carry on from there until the end of chapter 261, making it cover 2.5 chapters. And you'll see, like, as I go through this list, I usually think that episodes are going to cover 2 to 3 chapters, right, per episode, maybe even 2.5, right? And I know for some seasons you can't really do that, but this is a very, very action-intensive season, right? There's a lot of fighting going on in this season, right? So I feel a little more comfortable kind of getting into that 2 to 2.5, 3 even sometimes chapter range for episodes. And we've seen them even adapt 4 to 5 chapters in an episode before. So it really is all up to them how they want to pace it, but you'll see pretty much the average throughout this video is going to be 2.5 chapters. So I think episode 2 is going to end off with the High-Ends breaking out of their pods against Mirko. And for episode 3, I think we're going to start off like halfway through chapter 261 with Mirko fighting the High-Ends, you know, having kind of really big fight with all the different High-Ends in the basement. You know, we saw Endeavor fighting one of the completed High-End Nomu, but now we're going to be watching Mirko fighting a room full of like near High-Ends, and I think that's really interesting. And I'm really glad that that's the kind of stuff that we're going to be getting into like right away as the season begins, right? Like we pretty much start the arc off on an amazingly high note because of Mirko. In the middle of the 3rd episode, I think we're going to cut to the students and pretty much like Team B, and by the end of the episode, I think we're going to be on the scene where the villains are aware that the heroes are there and their base splits open, and then we kind of have like there's like a double page spread where the heroes are on one side and the villains are on another side, talking about like a hero or a Quirk Liberation Party or something like that. So that's right where I think the episode is going to end. I feel like that would be a good place to end the episode. Episode 4, we're going to be going from chapter 263.5 to 265, which is another 2.5 chapters. I think we're going to start off with Kaminari's scene against the electric villain. Maybe they might even expand on that a little bit. Then we're going to get some scenes of heroes defeating villains, and from there I think the really interesting stuff is going to happen. Instead of ending the end of last episode with like the Hawks cliffhanger with Hawks and Twice. I think you do that at the midway point of this episode, and then you can continue on after the commercial break to pretty much do most of Hawks versus Twice, ending the episode on Dobby's arrival to the room. For episode 5, I think we're still going to be covering some of chapter 265's content all the way to chapter 267, bringing that to another total of 2.5 chapters. And I think we're going to start that episode off watching Tokoyami's point of view, kind of watching him clean up, read Destro, finding Maki and stuff like that, and then getting in the Fat Gum's belly as he kind of walks away. And from there, of course, we're going to go on and see Twice's death, kind of that whole scene play out. And I do think they will fit the Dobby Black speech bubble part in the anime in this episode, and also the kind of Tokoyami saving Hawks and Mirko breaking the pod cliffhanger. I think that's where this episode is going to end. So for the next episode, episode 6, I think we're going to be covering chapters 287 through chapter 270, and kind of like halfway through that chapter right in the manga, bringing us to our highest total so far at 3.5 chapters. And I think this episode is going to begin with Tokoyami versus Dobby, kind of that little skirmish that they had. We're going to see Makia standing up at smelling the scent of Shigaraki, kind of being in the world now, being outside of his pod, once the pod is kind of shattered to a certain extent by Mirko. And then from there, I think we're going to see Shigaraki's dream, and I'm kind of conflicted here, right? Because I think a good place to end the episode would be like Shigaraki waking up in his dream and being like, where am I? And kind of that being a cliffhanger. But I do think it's possible that we see the totality of Shigaraki's dream, and then Deku feels Shigaraki's presence, with the episode ending on the giant wave of decay, right? And then Shigaraki pretty much calling Makia and telling him that they're going to destroy everything. I think it could be one of those episodes where they just cut out the credits, right? Because if you cut out the credits, you could fit the rest of that scene, and you don't have to have that start off the next episode. The next episode, episode 8, I think we're going to be covering chapters 273.5, kind of again in the midway point of that chapter, because Bones does do that a lot. They do leave us off on kind of mid-chapter cliffhangers a lot. So I think we're going to start off halfway in 273, and we're going to cover all the way to chapter 275, bringing us to another total of around 2.5 chapters. I think that episode is going to start off with Toga's rampage at her anger at Twice's death, right? We did see Toga kind of go crazy as Makia was getting ready to leave that place. I think we're going to cut back to Endeavor versus Shigaraki for a little bit, and maybe they'll extend that a little while, you know, but there is a fight still to come between the two of them. But I think sooner than later, we're going to see Shigaraki realizing that he's looking for One For All, right? And using a search quirk, and pretty much start the process of looking for Deku, while Bakugo and Deku are having a conversation about what they're going to do, what their plan is going to be. Bakugo's going through some insecurities and stuff like that. And I think the episode could either end on Shigaraki appearing right in front of Deku and Bakugo, or if you want to make it even better, I think you could end it on the you really are cool Eraserhead moment, right? From a few moments later, where Eraserhead stops Shigaraki right in his tracks. With episode 9, I think we're going to be covering chapters 275.5, kind of in that midway point again, all the way to the midpoint of chapter 278. And I think this episode is going to start with Endeavor versus Shigaraki continued. Then we're going to see the near Hyens appear, like that kind of weird berserk-looking dog Hyen and everything on the battlefield, heading towards Deku, Bakugo, and Gran Torino. In that episode, I do think we are going to see Midnight's death scene, and from there I think the episode could end on a really good cliffhanger of Makia running towards Momo, right? Like as Momo is still panicking. Episode 10, I think we're going to wrap up chapter 278 and go all the way to chapter 280, bringing it to another 2.5 chapter episode. I think in the beginning of that episode, Momo is going to begin her plan, right? Obviously the big massive plan that she uses to take advantage of all the 1A and 1B students together to take down Makia. I think we are going to see that plan begin, right? We're going to see the Kirishima, Mina, and Makia scene, obviously. And then I do think that that episode is going to end on Makia's mouth sliding up and him kind of going into assault mode, while Shigaraki is like on the ground in front of Endeavor, Deku, and Bakugo with cracks all along his body, telling them about his father's words about, you know, who heroes are and like how they hurt their families to save strangers. With episode 11, I think we're going to cover chapters 281 to chapters 282, which is going to be the first just 2-chapter episode in the season ever since the 3rd episode. And I think in this episode we're going to see Shigaraki letting loose on Endeavor and Gran Torino, sadly. I also think we're going to see the scene where he uses a quirk erasing bullet on Aizawa, and from there I really think the episode could go on a little longer, but I don't think you miss out on the chance of having like the Makia coming towards the town as the cliffhanger, right, of the episode, right? I don't think you waste that. That could be an awesome ending for an episode. Just Makia stampeding towards the screen as you see him off in the distance getting closer while people are just walking by in shops and stuff. Like, that was a really haunting cliffhanger for the chapter. I definitely think you have to take advantage of that and do that for the episode as well. So that's how I think episode 11 is going to end. With episode 12, I think we're going to cover chapters 283 to chapter 285, meaning we're going to cover 3 chapters. And in that chapter, I do think we're going to see the students regrouping after Makia, right? Obviously they all survived, you know, they all survived his rampage through the forest and cutting through and just making a swath through the towns. From there, I do think we're going to see Shigaraki versus the heroes continued, pretty much beating them down some more, fighting against Ryukyu and all the people that are there, Deku and everybody. And then I think from there, we're going to see Deku using float for the first time, kind of saving everyone from Shigaraki, taking them off the ground and away from Decay, and also making it so that he can pretty much just do like a Shigaraki yo-yo. There's been a bunch of fan animations of that, of Shigaraki just on the end of Black Whip getting brought back to Deku's fist for repeated punch. I do think we're going to see that in this episode. But of course, the perfect place to end this episode off is going to be Bakugo's body moving on its own, right? That is the perfect episode cliffhanger, I think. For episode 12 especially, that tends to be the episode where like the core is over. So you have to have some sort of cliffhanger to set up what's next. Or like it's the big moment, you know what I mean? Episode 11, episode 12, episode 13, you got to be getting into something important, right? Or something climactic, I think, in that section of episodes if you're going to have like a healthy season, in my opinion. So I definitely do think we're going to end off episode 12 with Bakugo's body moving on its own to save Deku. And then in episode 13, I think we're covering chapter 286 to 287. So we're going to take it slower this time, just 2 chapters. You know that Deku is going to go crazy if Bakugo is hurt, right? So Deku goes insane. We get a snapshot of the other battlefield and like what the other heroes are going through, fighting the villains and whatnot, because there's battles going on all over Japan. And from there we have a Vestige World meeting between One for All and All for One, pretty much all of the users of both of those individual quirks in the same space at the same time as Shigaraki tries to steal One for All. And then at the very end of the episode, I think we're going to see Dabi like happily preparing for what's about to happen, you know, saying, oh, Endeavor and Shigaraki are there, that sounds good. Hey Skeptic, put together this little PowerPoint for me real quick. Thank you very much, I appreciate that. Do it now. And I think the very end of the episode, maybe even like a post-credit scene, could be like that Best Genius teaser, kind of like of him in the plane and the person being like, are you ready? Or whatever it is that happened at the very beginning of the next chapter. In episode 14, I think we're covering chapters 288 to 289, another just 2-chapter episode. I think this is pretty much going to be the Toga versus Ochako episode, right? So Toga's going to find Ochako. We're going to see Ochako versus Toga, keeping up with the theme of like Ochako and Nejire and Froppy being kind of a group. We're also going to kind of cut to Nejire and Shoto versus Shigaraki. And then I think we're going to end off with the scene of Toga leaving Ochako behind crying, right? I think that would be a good place to end that particular episode. But if you wanted to go a little bit further, right, you could end it off with Makia arriving to the Shigaraki battlefield, right? And everyone turning and realizing, uh-oh, Maki is here. That would be another really great use of Makia for a cliffhanger, I think. With episode 15, I think we're getting to one of the things that people want to see the absolute most in this season. And I think this episode is going to be covering chapters 290 to chapter 292. So 3 chapters of content, but I feel like you have to do all this together. We're going to probably start the episode off in Rei's hospital room. From there, we're going to get Dabi's dance, right? And Dabi's big reveal to Endeavor and Shoto. And then I believe we're going to see some of Toya's backstory just through Endeavor kind of remembering like various things that happened, maybe just a little bit. We're probably going to get a long drawn out section of Endeavor like sitting on his knees, looking up, kind of scarred and scared at what he's seeing. And then from there, as Dabi tries doing his prominence burn against Endeavor, I do think we're going to see Genis arrive. And even further than that, I think the episode could end on Mirio's return, right? Like, I don't think Genis arriving and kind of like after that high of an episode of all Dabi Toya stuff, then having Genis arrive just to shut it down, I think kind of would be a weird place to end the episode. But you could end the episode there just because it's kind of shocking that Genis has returned, right? So that would be kind of a nice episode cliffhanger in and of itself. But I do think that there's a possibility that the episode goes all the way to even doing Mirio's return, right? At the end of chapter 292. So if you don't do that in this episode, you could definitely fit it in next episode, because I do think we're starting episode 16 by covering the Eri and Mirio scene, right? Where Eri gives Mirio back his powers in that very short flashback. I do think you could just fit Mirio's return there and wrap all that up in like 5 or 6 minutes of the episode. I do think that episode 16 is going to cover chapters 293 to 295, which is about 3 chapters. And in those 3 chapters, we see again the Eri and Mirio stuff. We get Bakugo's hero name. Dabi versus Shoto happens for a little bit. Makia begins to fall. There's actually a lot of stuff that happens in this chapter. Compressor's reveal also happens in this chapter. Deku awakens danger sense in this chapter, and Shigaraki inevitably escapes, right? So that could be a very crazy, very insane episode. I do think the episode where Shigaraki escapes, they are going to cut the credits, right? Cut the outro credits to kind of give us a little bit of a longer episode like they do sometimes. Maybe even cut the intro, right? Like to really get all the time you can, like they do in some very key episodes, right? But after that, in episode 17, I do think we're going to start getting into like post-war stuff, right? So it's going to be chapter 296 to chapter 297. That's going to be a 2-chapter episode, and pretty much we're going to see the war wrap up, you know, a vision of all the destruction that's happened in the world of My Hero Academia ever since this war began. And we're going to start to see heroes themselves break down to a certain extent, right? Like as you're doing all the cleanup and stuff like that, we're going to see some heroes who just clearly weren't built for this level of action and this level of chaos and destruction. So we start seeing heroes losing faith, and then we're going to start seeing really, really sad stuff, like the heroes finding Midnight, or the students finding Midnight, I should say. We're going to see the list of bodies that happened in the war arc, you know, all the people that didn't make it. Not to give us a break, not being one that would give us a pause. All for One is going to orchestrate the Tartarus prison break. And I do think that is what's going to take up the second half of this episode, right? The first half is going to be a lot of like, you know, wars wrapping up, here's what happened and everything. And then that night is when the prison break happens. So I do think that is going to be in the same episode. Next episode, episode 18, almost nearing the end here. We have 7 episodes left. I believe it's going to cover chapters 298 all the way to the halfway point of chapter 300, right? So in those chapters, All for One raids more prisons. We get the hospital scenes, right, where people start waking up in the hospital, like Bakugo and Endeavor and whatnot. We find out that Deku's in a coma, actually, after the events of the war arc and after pushing himself pretty much to his absolute limits. And from there, I think we'll cut to Hawks walking around, right, and talking to Genis and kind of thinking about his backstory. And that's how we'll kind of segue into Hawks' backstory. And as that backstory comes to an end, I think the backstory is pretty much going to take up most of the episode to a certain extent. I think we're going to start seeing some of those hero resignations, right, and Stain returning, but maybe that could even be pushed to the next episode. So if episode 19, I think we're going to be covering the rest of that halfway point of chapter 300 all the way to chapter 302, so that's going to be another 2.5 chapter episode. And I think largely this episode is pretty much going to contain most of the Toya backstory, right, or if not all of the Toya backstory, to really give us an idea of what Dabi was going through. And then at the end of the flashback, I think the episode is going to be pretty much right about ending, with Endeavor's family pretty much telling him that they all plan on taking down Toya together and saving him, right? So let's all do this together. Don't feel like you can't do this just because you can't do this alone. You don't have to do this alone. We'll do it as a family, and we'll reassemble ourselves and fix ourselves all together. So I really like that, even though I don't see how that's really been put into practice in this final arc after this, right, in My Hero Academia's manga. But sure, that was a very sweet scene between the family. In episode 20, I think we're going to be covering chapters 303 to 304, another 2-chapter episode. And I think in this episode, we're going to start seeing Hawks asking questions about One for All, right? Like really asking questions around the hospital about what One for All is. Like even asking Endeavor, like, hey, do you know anything about that? Could that be related to anything? Then Endeavor's going to tell him it's probably related to Deku. And then obviously we're going to go see Hawks trying to talk to All Might. But while All Might is kind of like busy, preoccupied, holding Deku's arm, I think we're going to start seeing some of Deku's vestige meeting, right? Like the whole meeting that Deku has with all the vestiges, minus 2 who just wanted to stare at a wall for some reason. But we're going to see the conversation between Deku and all the vestiges, Nana asking about Shigaraki and stuff like that. And then at the very end of the episode, I think All Might is going to stand up from that and promise to tell Hawks everything about One for All, right? And finally kind of let the secret out. Episode 21, we have not many left. With episode 21, I think we're going to start getting into the final, very interesting content in the season, covering chapters 305 and 306. 306 is a very well-known chapter among manga readers, right? So I think this episode is going to cover 2 chapters, and I definitely think we're going to start off 3 days after, you know, all the events have taken place, the prison break, the war and everything. Society is in shambles. So I do think we're going to take kind of like a little bit of a drawn out period, like maybe half the episode, to get the pro-hero statement, like Endeavor and various hero statements, you know, about all the things that happened in the war arc and all the allegations that came out as a result of Dabi's PowerPoint presentation. And then from there, I think the episode is going to end off with the students of Class 1A receiving letters from Deku, and Deku leaving UA, leaving his Hero Academia behind, right? And that could definitely be a great place to end the season off, you know what I mean? Like, so if this happening in episode 21 instead of like at the very end of the season in my list, that makes me wonder if I was pacing it a little too fast earlier in the list. But this would make for a good like season cliffhanger to start the next season with the Dark Deku or Vigilante Deku arc. But I do think it's possible to fit some of this in this season, and we have seen Bones ever since season 4 kind of step their foot a little into the next arc that's coming, right, before it actually comes. So I do think we will see a certain segment of the Vigilante Deku arc in this season of My Hero Academia, but if not, I do think a good place to end the season off would be the Vigilante Deku kind of like him leaving UA cliffhanger. But if they did try to fit some of the Vigilante Deku arc into season 6, I think episode 22 could cover chapters 307 to 309, which is going to be a 3-chapter episode featuring Yoshindo arriving and returning kind of back into the story after he kind of placed 10th in a popularity poll, and Horikoshi was like, all right, well, guess I gotta use them now. From there, we'll likely see Deku versus Muscular's rematch, right? And kind of like the whole fight between the two of them, which has been a long time coming, ever since the 3rd season of My Hero Academia, I believe. And wrapping up the episode, I do think we're gonna see the flashback where Deku gets the cape from Gran Torino, right? And then he heads back out using Gran Torino's scarf and kind of throwing it over his shoulder. With episode 23, I think we're covering chapters 310 to 311, which is another 2-chapter episode. And in this episode, I think we're gonna start off seeing Deku saving Ordinary Girl, like that kind of fox, large, thick kind of fox, whatever girl that is in My Hero Academia in like the Dark Deku arc. Then we're gonna see All Might giving Deku lunch. We're gonna see kind of like a wholesome scene between them to set up some stuff that's coming a little later. Then we'll cut to the flashback between the 1st and 2nd user and kind of the vestige meeting that happened between them very, very quickly. And from there, I think we'll start seeing the pro heroes start to mobilize to a certain extent, right? The top 3, along with All Might and Deku, start kind of moving a little. But I think we're gonna end the episode off of Lady Nagant shooting Deku's phone out of his hand, right? And kind of like her entering the picture at the very, very end of the episode. With episode 24, the second to last episode of the season, I think it's possible that we can cover chapters 312 all the way to 314, maybe even halfway through 314, where we have Deku versus Lady Nagant, right? And that's obviously going to take up most of the episode. But in that episode, definitely we're going to see a little bit of a flashback of like Lady Nagant and Chisaki kind of escaping from the prison after talking to All For One and her getting her orders. And then we'll cut away for a little bit to see All Might get attacked by some like random villains, before finally cutting back to Deku activating Fajin and Smoke to get the upper hand on Lady Nagant. And then I think we're going to start Lady Nagant's backstory at the very end of the episode, or we could kind of save that for the beginning of next episode, right? But the final episode of the season, I think, is going to pick up from the halfway point of chapter 314, or maybe even the beginning of that, right? To really get the full Nagant story in one episode. But then I think we're going to see Lady Nagant shooting at Chisaki, right? Then we're going to see Deku doing the foe 100% and all that kind of stuff, and kind of bringing the battle to its conclusion and its climax, with Lady Nagant sadly exploding, right? And then I think the season is going to end on a really, really nasty cliffhanger if it doesn't end on the Deku leaving UA cliffhanger. Post Lady Nagant exploding, right? And All For One kind of like being revealed once again to still be the biggest villain in My Hero Academia. I think we could possibly end the season off on the cliffhanger of All For One's message to Deku, right? Pretty much saying, "You're next." Explosion. So I know that would be a really, really lame cliffhanger to end the season on for people who do know what's happening in the manga, but I can imagine anime only viewers being like mind blown by that, right? But then being really, really disappointed next season when we just caught the Hawks being like, and then we survived. You know what I mean? Like, somehow we made it. So hopefully maybe if they do that cliffhanger, they'll flesh it out a little more next season and show us how they got out of there. But, you know, I don't know. I doubt Bones is ever going to flesh anything out all that much more. So that is my list of how many chapters I think My Hero Academia is going to cover. To give you an actual estimation, let's give you like a chapter count to episode count. We have total count for the amount of chapters that I think this season is going to cover are 61.5 chapters in 25 episodes. Let's see if that's possible. Maybe it's going to be something closer to 54 or 55. Let's see how good we do. Let's see if we don't do very well at all. I kind of like it either way. I like seeing how wrong I am or how right I am. Hope you guys enjoyed it. It was very, very highly asked for. So thank you guys so much. This is Pineapple. I'll see you guys next season, next time for My Hero Academia Season 7. Probably the final season of My Hero Academia. We have one more of these to do. Ever. That's kind of sad, right? Aw. I'll see you guys next time for the last time. It's Pineapple. Peace.